I am Alan Wolk, the co-founder and lead analyst at TV Rev. I'm going to talk you guys through out there in Zoom land. We're going to talk about interactivity and how it relates to ATSC 3.0, which is a really interesting topic given how long interactivity has been on the radar of the television industry. And we're going to talk to these guys about how to make it work. So I have three panelists who I'm pretty excited about because they all have some good experience from their companies in this area. So I'm going to start off with the person I see on my screen now, Mark Corll. If you could just introduce yourself for a second and let everybody know who you are and what your company does.
Hi, I'm Mark Corll. I'm the Senior VP of Immersion Technology at Triveni Digital. Triveni Digital does studio equipment primarily, along with test and measurement equipment and data casting equipment, mostly for the studio. But primarily, and my reason for being on this panel is that I am the chair of the S38 specialist group that wrote the interactivity standards for ATSC 3. So I actually took part in and actually authored much of that document along, as a document editor. I won't say I had authored all of it, but there's a lot of stuff in there that I'm pretty familiar with. And so I think that, that's pretty much my background and reason for being here on this panel. So
That's great. That's great. Next, I'm going to turn to Oliver Botti, who is joining us from Italy all the way.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Alan. I'm Oliver Botti. I'm responsible of international business development and innovation at Fincons Group. Fincons is a consulting and system integration company. We're on the market from 38 years now. And let me say that leveraging the experience we started doing in the European market with HBTV, then we started since 2018 to collaborate with NAB directly and with US broadcasters pioneering the adoption of ATSC 3. So we were lucky to develop at the beginning, really the first, with NAB, the first interactive TV reference software and also guidebook. And so from there, we learned a lot with the pioneering broadcasters. We're one of the lead application developers on the A3FA framework that Pearl and Phoenix partners have developed on behalf of the industry. And today we are supporting some of the broadcasters to launch their next Gen TV into production. So we are really thrilled by this activity, and I think there's much more to come.
Excellent. And next we're going to Richard Glosser, who's just gone off mute. Perfect. Richard, tell us about yourself.
Sure. First, thanks, Alan, for having me on the panel. I'm Richard Glosser, head of business development for Verint. Verint is a software company based in San Diego that has been building technologies around watermarks for 25 years. And we were selected to be part of the 3.0 standard and contributed to it. And the watermark becomes kind of key in this interactivity because there's some key use cases where you need a watermark in order to connect to the TV, because in an over-the-air use case, this third channel beyond audio and video, this third channel of data and broadcaster app is received by a 3.0 TV, but there's a bunch of use cases where that data won't go through an HDMI cord. So they needed a watermark. We were selected. We've been involved now in helping to showcase some of the different interactive capabilities that the standard can bring, which we'll talk about. And so look forward to talking more about them.
Okay, so I'm going to start with you. I'm going to a pressing question I'm sure a lot of the audience is wondering about too. Can you actually play the instruments behind you?
I can strum them at best, but I thanks for noticing, and I'm happy to share them with the Zoom audience.
They are very cool. But in getting to the topic at hand, so as I start, and I'll start with you, Richard. As I said at the beginning, interactivity has been a goal for the TV industry for a really long time, but it really hasn't taken off in the way that you might have thought over the last 10 years. So, what do you think's been holding it back? Is it a technology thing, a lack of imagination, or just a lack of consumer desire or understanding of it, or some combination thereof?
I think that what the 3.0 standard has created, and obviously Mark can speak more to the standard, but it literally puts a browser on top of the linear TV stream. And it allows broadcasters to access the capabilities of W3C standards, HTML5, to start to really integrate into the first screen. We've all lived through lots of different efforts where you're trying to synchronize in some way. I think what makes this different is you're blending this hybrid of both capabilities on one screen. And I think that becomes a new playing field here. And so that's what we're excited about.
So you think it's more of a technology thing, that they've finally been able to get it so that it's just easier for consumers to use with the ATSC 3.0 standard?
I think so. I think that and there's going to be optionality here, both in terms of how you can use a remote control or how you can use your phone. I think that producers and broadcasters can choose to kind of craft a user experience that makes sense. And I think that you're ultimately making it also optional, because not everyone necessarily wants to participate. We'll talk more about some of the individual applications, but if people want to just be passive and sit on the couch, that's great, but you're giving people an option. If they want to participate, they can kind of raise their hand either through a press of a button on their phone or the remote, and now all of a sudden launch an experience that you're not hitting people who aren't interested in it over the head and just becoming a nuisance.
Okay, so now Mark, since you were tagged more or less in that as the tech guy who invented all this, what can you explain a little bit what Richard means by it's a browser?
Sure. Yeah, it's so one of the differences that we have in the ATSC world is that, as compared to some of the older technologies, is that it's really based entirely off of W3C. So all of the technology that we've done.
And what is, let me clear you, what is W3C?
W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium. Oh. That is literally what it means. Good. It's basically the standards body that describes HTML5, CSS, cascading style sheets, and all of the things that make your browser go. Is what W3C defines. And so what we decided quite a few years ago now, probably 5 or 6 years, I think it was, to leverage that technology, leverage all of that information, and actually move it into the TV, as it were. So most TVs, smart TVs these days, have browsers in them. You can do various things on the smart TV. But what we did with ATSC 3, as Richard mentioned, is we layered on top of essentially a live linear broadcast, the mechanism for essentially putting up, and I won't call it a browser, by technical terms, it's a user agent, right? So the user agent is the guts of the browser without all the, Windows stuff around it. That's just basically putting up the HTML and doing all of that, and layering that on top of what is essentially a live video background. So as you do that, you can basically, as a broadcaster, decide to put up graphics. You can do a variety of different things but mostly you can actually run code. So JavaScript is enabled. So you can actually program and have your own experience modified for the person. And some of the areas that we really think this is important is in terms of personalization. And interactivity is primarily about engaging with the consumer to make their experience with the live linear and with the television set, basically more to their needs. And if we look at, you asked the question about are people, is it the interactivity itself? People these days are really used to all of their cable systems and their satellite systems and everything else and their phones and all of this stuff. And they're used to working with video with interactivity on it, right? They just do that every day. I mean, people are just constantly. I think that's the standard has layered in that. And so we can take advantage of all of the stuff that's happening on the web, OTT, and we can leverage that, a lot of that development, a lot of that activity on the TV development now for the interactivity. So we don't have sort of two worlds. It's all the same world.
Gotcha. Now, Oliver, you guys have actually been building some of these things out. Like, what were some of the things that, when you started to do this? Clearly, you knew that, like in the past, okay, people didn't take to this. Just what were some of the things that you guys were thinking about as you were building this out? Like, what could you do differently, and what were you sort of careful not to do again?
Well, I think that's I fully agree with you, Alan, that Next Gen TV has not yet unlocked its full potentials. Right. And of course, I agree with Richard and Mark, which are our partners since the beginning of this initiative. Technology is important, but now I think there is also the need to scale in terms of people and market awareness. And we are experiencing this also on the European market, and here in the US, we are finding exactly the same phase. So if we look at the evolution roadmap towards a wider adoption of Next Gen TV, we started initially, and we started the initial step working with broadcasters and with technological partners, because the first point was to enable the technical infrastructure to be able to be used. But then the next step, and so we with the goal to enable broadcasters to plan their Next Gen TV roadmap, the focus was initially, for example, on entertainment. So we launched a number of applications with NAB regarding the entertainment enhancement. But then more and more, looking at the brands and looking at the monetization of that, we started also launching applications and designing applications in, for example, with CBS regarding e-commerce. So the possibility to introduce click and buy functionalities to move from a sponsorship model to a sort of direct e-commerce one. And also we introduced, for example, with Verance, interesting and appealing gamification applications in sport, which are also driving a sort of new monetization paradigm. But I think that the next step will be moving from this kind of entertainment to more infotainment, and finally, ultimately, to services to the citizen, because this is where the people awareness will change the mood and the scale. And also, it's a matter of not only the people as a public, but also the people as brands and the people which is putting money in the television landscape. So here is where, for example, we, and not only we, are now investing in applications regarding news, in applications regarding remote schooling, for example. So where the service to the citizen is really clear, the value for the citizen is really clear. And then we can go back to think again about monetization. So probably this kind of reverse is not a mistake that the market did. It's just a way to approach that started from thinking about a possible business model, but then I think we need to bring on board the citizens at the end and the market itself.
No, that makes sense. So Richard, Oliver was just talking about some sports thing that you guys were doing. How does the watermark fit in with that? How does that work?
Well, again, there's some key use cases here. If in this is part of the standard, if as broadcasters send out this third channel of data, it can be received by an over-the-air 3.0 TV. And where the watermark comes in is if somebody's watching that channel and they're watching on a set-top box or through satellite or MVPD or media adapter or any of those configurations that have an HDMI cord to the TV, the data can't get through an HDMI cord as they're presently designed. So you put a watermark in, which is a signal that identifies the channel and it identifies the time. It gets read by a smart TV. It converts to what becomes like an HTML5 tag. It gets converted to a server code that goes to the broadcaster server, and it recovers the data. And then it uses the watermark to synchronize it on a frame accurate basis. So that kind of the guts of that allows a use case I mentioned of somebody that's watching on an HDMI cord. It also allows somebody who's watching on a cable network. So while 3.0 is a broadcast-driven capability, this part of the standard, using a watermark to access interactivity, can be now available to cable networks. So we've been talking and identified sports as an area of high interest. It's one that we saw a study that was a few years old that showed 25% of people who watch an NFL bet on games, and they consume 50% of the minutes of watching. That if you can get, obviously there's a tremendous amount of new states that are becoming legal. There's all the media networks are creating relationships with sports books. So we saw a lot of interest in this category. So we've begun to do some proof of concepts that begin to create, think of it almost as kind of L-bar of activity that is
an L-bar. What is that?
So you're watching a live sport.
Uh-huh.
You've opted into this experience. It squeezes back the screen enough so that you can have a graphical L-bar. And now
so literally like that, like the letter L. Okay.
Yeah. And so now what you have is this hybrid experience where the graphics are coming from a broadband server, and the live video is coming from broadcast. And what you can then do is you could start to have enhanced stats. You could start to personalize. I could now pair my sportsbook app or my sports app of that network. I could pair it to my TV in the same way you pair your Netflix phone to your TV. Now all of a sudden, I can start to see my fantasy players, or I can start to see bets or odds specific to that game. And so you're starting to see this ability to have this enhanced experience, right? Again, side by side, stats, information, tracking, right with you're watching the game. So we've been talking to the ecosystem, and there's been interest. We're starting to do proof of concepts with sports media networks, sports books, sports data companies, to begin to understand what's the user experience, what are the issues, how can we begin to kind of show what this toolbox is, so that the various stakeholders who need to weigh in on how we move forward can do this. So far, lots of excitement. And again, what I was saying at the top, this capability is available to RSNs and cable networks who in many ways have a great stake. One last point, I'll let someone else talk. What this also begins to do is the way that sports betting is rolling out around the country is, I think there's 14 states. So you've got this patchwork. Some states have legal sports betting, others you can't. So you now have the ability to kind of customize experiences by geography as well.
Gotcha. So now, Mark, this sounds really complicated. Like, if I'm an engineer, like, are we gonna have to train a whole new generation of engineers on how to do this, or is it not that? Is it just sound complicated?
Well, I mean, to some degree, it is complicated because there is a difference in terms of how the interactivity is laid out for a TV, right? So the TV is itself a different media. It's something that people are, you don't have a keyboard, you don't have a mouse, you generally don't have that kind of interactivity in terms of a user interface. But at the same point, the code, we've already trained a whole generation in how to code this stuff. Right. You don't have to go out like in the years past when we had different interactivity standards. They were based on completely new languages. Generally, we didn't even have the benefit of Java and C. Generally, it was something else completely that was just in essence made up for the TV. Now we are using HTML5. Now we are using JavaScript. Now we are using all the things that the web is based on.
Gotcha.
And so you have a whole bunch of developers out there that fundamentally know how to program. What you have to teach them is how to program for TV, which is, it's a different media. It's almost like thinking about programming a website for a phone versus a browser on your PC, right? Those are different media. There's ways of determining that and laying them out differently. And you have to be aware that you have a remote control that's controlling the thing on the phone, or I mean, on the thing on the TV. So it's a little trickier in terms of how to interact with that. Now, there is another standard in the ATSC 3 that allows for what's called a companion device or a second screen to be used. And you can actually have a cell phone with an app on it communicating directly with the television. So you can move the user experience of interacting, the physical interaction, the lean forward, poking at buttons and things on the phone, which everybody knows how to do these days. And that communicates directly with the television. So you're not locked into this, 10 button remote that does very limited things. You can actually use the cell phone along with, and you can have a very, very customized interface there to interact with the content that's happening on the big screen.
Yes. No, I just the fact that the cell phone has a keyboard is huge. I take advantage of that at times. Now, it's interesting. This is all interesting to me. In the early days when you talked about interactivity and with TV, a lot of what people used to sort of always bring up was this thing called Jennifer Aniston's sweater, which people under 30 now know what I'm talking about because of all the Friends reruns. But there's this notion that you saw something on a show, an item of clothing you wanted to buy or something, and you clicked on it. And what happened, what they quickly realized is, well, no one wants to stop watching, an entertaining, like a scripted program, a drama or a comedy to buy something maybe after the fact. So I thought it was really interesting, and what you guys did, Oliver, with CBS, because that does seem to be something that, like, okay, I could see why somebody would buy, would want to stop and buy it. Can you give us a little bit of detail about that? Because I thought it's a really
The experience with CBS, I think, was very interesting, because with the Saturday morning segment, The Dish, we tested the sort of click and buy or shoppable content functionality, which is just one more way to exploit this interactivity.
Right.
The Dish is...
Yeah, what kind of show is it? Just so people know, what kind of show is The Dish? What is it about?
Yeah. The Dish is a cooking TV format where famous chefs are invited as guests, and they present their latest book that they just published, and they cook live a recipe. And what we enabled with the remote initially, but now also by vocal control, for example, to simplify the user experience, we enabled, for example, the user to click and download and share the recipe, or click and download and buy on Amazon directly with one click the book of the famous chef, which is promoted, or even click and buy the ingredients of the recipe on Amazon Fresh. So that's a kind of new models that, of course, everybody is discussing, okay, what about in the interruption of the program? But in this kind of program, it can be a new format that is designed for this purpose. The same kind of interactivity within a movie, of course, we have already experienced this in Europe, has to be implemented in different ways. So it's a sort of shifted purchasing action where when you click, you're not going to buy immediately your car, but you're going to put this in your wish list, and you will consult your wish list later on, maybe on another device. That's another kind of interactivity. But the interesting transformation is the move, and several brands are following this with a lot of interest. Car makers in particular, the automotive is the first market which is moving their attention seriously, is the possibility to create a further engagement with the users, with the audience, and to leverage the power of the TV brand, in addition with the interactivity and the personalization, which is more typical of the online world. So this is the mix, which is the right combination that may generate something new. I like it a lot. Also, the great example we built with Verance on sport gamification, where with NES, I mean, I was passionate about that because the pilot we implemented with NES, which is called Gamecast, basically introduced, you can imagine, a Boston Bruin match. And during the Boston Bruin match, the commentator were talking about the match itself, but also about the gaming, a sort of e-game that was introduced by putting questions in overlay on that L shape that Richard mentioned. We put, you see at the appearance of questions which says, okay, is gonna Partiznak to score an empty net goal in the next? Yes or no? And you get coins, or you get points in the Gamecast game. And so we are moving on with either the live match and the game on top of the game. So if you think about COVID that has opened a new scenario with stadium without fans, this was also an opportunity to introduce, to reinvent fan engagement, introducing a new social dimension within live sports. I think that the last frontier is to, as I was saying at the beginning, to introduce also new kind of services. So, I mean, this kind of application are really engaging, and a lot of experiments are going on to test the market and also to educate concurrently the market. But the new frontier is, for example, we are doing an interesting experiment that will be ready for the next NAB, which is with Scripps and NAB, an application about the news literacy, a news literacy app, whose aim is to educate about fake news identification. So this is where the introduction of interactivity is something that can help people to better understand if a news, how to recognize a fake news. So that's really something useful, not only engaging. It's also useful. The two things together, I think, will be a good mix to help the takeoff on a wider scale of the entire next gen TV landscape.
And just because I think it's a really incredible project. The fake news thing is an incredible project. How does it, just a little bit on how does that work? Like how does it teach you how to recognize fake news?
Yeah, basically the user can interact, can share content, can navigate, and learn and share the abilities needed to be a smart and active consumer of news and information. So there is a survey that I read on Checkology, which is a free learning platform, which the survey says the more news literate you are, the less likely you are to believe in conspiracy theories, for example.
Yes.
So basically, journalists are trying to transfer to the audience their own capability to recognize the fake news. And this is a kind of education that I think it's interesting and may bring it to a wider awareness and rapid awareness of next-gen TV potentials. And then we can go back to monetize and all the other discussions.
Yeah, which actually brings up another really good point. Something, Mark, you were talking to me about sort of before. This notion is like, how do we get with the ATSC 3? At what point do we get a big enough base that people are excited to start developing things for this, and that it really takes off? Because there does seem to be a bit of a runway for ATSC 3.0 right now, and how do you what are some ways you think that we can that the industry can sort of push it?
Well, I mean, I think it's generally broadcasters like to have receivers in the marketplace that they can target, right? I mean, that's kind of, if you don't have people watching your content, it's not particularly useful. And one of the things there, and it's always been a problem, since we went and did, the original transition to HD, how do you get receivers in the marketplace, right? So there have been groups of broadcasters that are working very, very closely with CE manufacturers. There were a number of televisions announced last CES, actually CES before that. So there's probably about 30 models of next-gen TV TVs in the marketplace right now. They're pretty high end, but that's moving down market now. The other thing that's going on is that CTA and NAB they have a logo program. And so you can go into you will be able to go into your Best Buy or wherever and see a television, and there'll be a box and there'll be a logo on the box that says Next Gen TV. And that television will have met all of the criteria that are required for it to receive that logo. And so there's a logo program that was developed by NAB and CTA. And there's a whole suite of tests that televisions have to opt into, that television manufacturers opt into, and they run those tests against it. And once everyone's satisfied that the TVs meet those tests, they get the nice little logo that they can put on there. So as people are out buying new TVs, if you're going to look for a new TV, soon you'll be able to identify those TVs as a next-gen TV, and we'll be able to receive ATSC 3 over the air. And so, start looking for that. And that is driving a broader base, not to mention the fact that there's a number of broadcasters on air now, which helps the CE manufacturers sell product, right? So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, and it's been going on for the last couple of years, but we're starting to see larger uptake now. And a lot of stations coming on air. We'll have more here very shortly.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Just to add, Madeline Nolan said earlier there were 55 models now on the market, and also Steve Koenig from the CTA said that by 2024 there will be 25 million 3.0 TVs. So the train is starting to move, and that's exciting as we all participate in this new market.
Right. And you had mentioned something, Richard, that cable networks can also take advantage of this.
Yeah, again, they're not able to participate in the broadcast audio and video parts of the standard, but again, through our watermark and through a TV that has the runtime environment, they can start to participate in the interactivity part of it. And again, we've been doing some experimentation with some cable networks around that now. I think that we feel like, and I think they feel like that the cable audiences, they want to present an equivalent experience as the broadcast audience in terms of interactivity.
Gotcha. Now, Oliver, is this something that's available in Europe as well as the US, or is it just US for now?
Yeah, no. This is also migrating from US. I thought that interactive TV migrated from Europe to US. I think that this concept is migrating vice versa from US to Europe. And also with Verance, we are bringing this very useful technology of watermarking, which is well known, of course, but not its application. What is new is its application, for example, to enable to maintain and not to lose all the metadata that you need to add to a video asset to enable interactivity. Normally, if this metadata is added by the broadcaster in the broadcaster signal, then it can be lost when, for example, is transmitted through a cable with another protocol. And the watermarking is capable to rebuild at the end these signals that are enabling the interactivity. So that's very useful. Also, I think that's another aspect which is definitely going to emerge gradually. I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's gradually emerging practically, is the value of data. Because we are moving towards, with the introduction of all the tracking, because everything that is done in an interactive environment can be tracked. Of course, yes, according to personal privacy compliance and consensus request, explicit consensus. In Europe, we have the so-called GDPR, which is very strong, but also in the US, we have similar constraints. But everything is tracked, monitoring, and we can move towards also, thanks to the introduction of machine learning and artificial intelligence in general, which can analyze this huge amount of data. We're moving towards not only an interactive and addressable TV, but also an augmented TV. This is what I think we are bringing again from US to the rest of the world, the concept of augmented TV, where augmented means that we have data that can drive targeted advertising and attribution, for example, can drive investment in content and new content and formats, because we can monitoring effectively the acceptance and the agreement of and the appreciation of the audience of a new format, and also to improve, for example, subscription-based services by a detailed analysis of what is consumed. So this data-driven environment is moving with next-gen TV capabilities, moving from the online, where it's already in place, to the TV environment. And that's very, very interesting for the business and for the audience at the end.
No, I agree. I mean, that's a huge thing for broadcasters, because as the rest of the industry moves towards streaming, which has all sorts of data and and accountability and attribution, it gives them a way to compete with that, because they suddenly have those same sort of stats too, and it doesn't you don't feel like you're dealing with a lesser object, and you're getting the same data, and it's great for advertisers, and they can look at it across everything. I'm going to end on that because I'm getting the signal that we are at time here. I want to thank you, gentlemen, very much for helping us and for enlightening us as to about what's going on. And Oliver, I know it's late there, so doubly thank you. And back to the now bearded Tim Hanlon.